in the country all the way down. He described mailing it to himself at the Mexico border,
Oh, wow.
you know, to get this across. And he was so nerve-wracked and, you know, about it because he had invested a large sum of money to getting it done. And sure enough, he got it back home. He chipped me 5 grams or so, and I wound up having it tested, you know, through a legitimate company. And they said, yeah, this matches identically. During this period of time prior to Avodart getting approved, I did blood work and I did see where my DHT was low. And theoretically, if I hopped on this bogus treatment, this Dutas from overseas, I'm going to see that number go up. Well, it was even lower after. So I knew that at the very least, it was blocking the 5-alpha reductase.
So we're here with another podcast for HairStacks, and I'm here with a very important guest, a special guest, and I would like for them to, you know, introduce themselves to the audience.
Sure. Yeah, Kyle, this is John. It's going to be my assumed name, and I'm, you know, guy in his early 50s who's been treating hair loss for about 30 years. And, you know, I've been present on the forums on and off over that period of time. And kind of my claim to fame goes all the way back. Where I might be known from is that I was on the hair loss help forum going back to August 2001 when I worked with the owner of the site to document my use of RU-58841. This was before it was readily available, and using the Wayback Machine, Kyle had been able to dig up, you know, some of those photos and footage, and I reached out to him and, you know, kind of wanted to share with everybody an update and maybe answer any questions, you know, that he might have with regards to that experience and how things have gone since that time.
Definitely. And I guess moving into the topic of our conversation, could you share your experience with hair loss and when you first became aware of it?
Yeah, I was a guy that in high school was treated for acne, you know, substantially with a number of antibiotics and Accutane. You know, I can't say I noticed anything at that period of time with regards to thinning, but, you know, if I look back to, you know, to growing up, my nickname within the family was Mop Top. And, you know, by the end of high school, you know, I had, you know, still a full head of hair. I mean, we're talking, you know, late 1990s at the end of high school, or excuse me, the early 1990s, I should say. You know, I had feathered haircut, but no real, you know, signs of recession. But for myself, I remember chatting with friends at the end of high school and saying, hey, if I lose my hair, and again, the old wives' tale of your mother's father, if he's bald, you're probably going to go bald. That's, you know, my thinking was, well, you know, it sounds like there's some medication out there, and if I notice it one bit, I'm going to jump in and try and do something about it. So that was kind of my first experience thinking about it, that it might happen. And then sure enough, sophomore year of college, we're talking 1991 going into 92. Sure enough, I noticed some recession and hopped on Rogaine at that point. 2% is what we had.
Oh man. Wow. Yeah. Do you remember those like Rogaine commercials? I was looking at the archives on YouTube for those, like, just for the media regarding hair loss, and I found a compilation of like old Rogaine commercials. Was it like something that was advertised a lot back then?
I can't believe I'm losing my hair back here.
Like father, like son.
Yeah, right.
Look, if you want to regrow some hair, check this out.
Rogaine? Don't you need a prescription?
Not anymore.
How's it work? Rogaine goes to the root of your hair and for some people gets it to grow.
What have you got to lose?
Nothing, I guess, except more hair.
That's been easy to use.
And it's starting to work.
See, there's room for growth in every relationship.
Rogaine, medically proven to regrow hair.
Will she feel the same way if you lose your hair?
Sure. She'll just feel it about somebody else.
Relax. Rogaine. It's simple, safe, and clinically proven to regrow hair. Does she want you to use Rogaine? better ask.
I remember the news. I did take note of it. It's not like I had hair loss and then I had to go digging to finding what it was. I remember following that vaguely through my high school years. So I think it was 1988 that was approved, and it wasn't until 91, 92 in that time frame when I started up. But I was familiar with it, and I remember seeing those advertisements on TV.
Now, did it come as a liquid or a foam when it was first released?
Yeah, it was a liquid, and it was, fairly greasy, a combination. I think the combination of things was 70% isopropyl alcohol and propylene glycol, PPG,
Mhm.
was the other 30%. But yeah, it wasn't until, and I had to look this up prior to when we spoke, minoxidil foam wasn't released until 2006.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it was brutal for styling.
Yeah. Still with the foam, some people complain about it too because, a lot of it's wasted on the hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. It
But
is. I do find, I personally, I find it quite preferable. And I know Kevin on uh, uh, Hair Cafe has a method for turning it into a liquid. I've never gone to that extent,
Mhm.
the way that I utilize it, but yeah, to me, it's just generally cleaner. It's not like a, styling mousse or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely my preference.
I've heard about some people just leaving it, like just spraying it into a can and just leaving it there for like 24 hours or so. And then, after those hours have gone by, it just becomes a liquid. So I heard about that method too as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's better for some people when it comes to not interacting with that propylene glycol, because I know some people can, be allergic to it. And to my knowledge, I think the foam version doesn't have that much propylene glycol, if like any at all. So it's a pretty preferable pathway for some people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there a familial history that you're aware of when it comes to hair loss? Like, do you have any close relatives who also experience it as well? And are any of them using treatments for androgenetic alopecia?
Yeah, I think I never met my grandparents on my father's side, and I never met my grandfather on my mother's side, although my understanding is that he had hair loss. My father had a full head of hair, not completely thick or otherwise, but good coverage, fairly
Hmm.
standard, classic, um, slick back hair, and lived till age 90. But if I remember, my grandmother had some diffuse loss, but never needed any kind of wig or styling, special styling for that. But yeah, I do have a couple of brothers, and they, they definitely have pattern loss as well. I've never even discussed with them whether or not they've undergone treatment or fought that, but it seems like probably of all of us, I had the most accelerated, loss and hopped on treatment right away. To my knowledge,
Hmm.
neither of them are using anything. So in terms of family history, that's what I'm familiar with.
You mentioned that you had a sort of accelerated loss out of your siblings. Could you describe the progression of your hair loss in terms of Norwood scale, if you can, and relative to
Yeah,
the age at which you were experiencing all of this?
yeah, I had pretty significant, at the time it sure felt, very significant, onset towards 2A, where there was diffuse loss, throughout the top. And I think in the hair loss help, you know, uh, documentary that we did, in terms of things, what people can see, although I shaved my head as a part of documenting things, you can see where the diffuse loss is. It's not as evident as I grow my hair out,
Mhm.
for that, but you can pretty clearly see where there's significant temporal recession, still relatively thick in the mid frontal area, but then going back. But in terms of my loss, it's never been significant on the crown. That has not been anything that was evident back then. So I was able to halt that, I think, just using the Rogaine, and it's been more than well stabilized. There's no bald spot coming in other than, what you expect with the standard cowlick.
Yeah. So going from there, you talked about how you were able to, I guess, hold off much of androgenetic alopecia with Rogaine. I think you also mentioned about Propecia, right?
Yeah, it was, kind of Propecia didn't come around until 1997.
Okay.
From so there's that 5-year gap, and so just by chance locally where I live, there was a hair loss clinic, and I contacted them because I wanted to find out, hey, what treatments are out there and available, and I went in for a consultation at the time. And again, this is in so many ways the dark ages, but they had the laser helmet all the way back in the mid 1990s. Might have been around 1994. They were selling Viviscal. They were offering 5% minoxidil with tretinoin and other just general scalp treatments to deal with seborrheic dermatitis for, scalp itch and that sort of thing. And I signed up, for their program because I was looking to do more. I was looking to make sure I was doing the most I could to stabilize things. And of course, a lot of those things don't have a ton of science as time has gone on. That's, highly debatable around red laser therapy.
Yeah.
Certainly 5% minoxidil came out and got approved, later on. Tretinoin has been shown subsequently to be helpful in a certain cohort of patients. And Viviscal is, your guess is as good as mine. But I was still experiencing shedding at that point in 94. And I felt like between using the laser and their treatments, I was much more stabilized. I can't say there was any kind of dramatic regrowth. But leading up to Propecia and its approval, it was interesting that that particular clinic, they knew and had alerted me to the fact that, this medication, it was, kind of advertised to me as a derivative of something that was already approved, not realizing that Proscar, already was approved. If the clinic probably could have sold it to me,
Hmm.
they would have. But, their medical director being pretty conservative, they weren't going to take something that was still under investigation and sell it. But technically, it was available. At that point in time, obviously, it would have taken an off-label prescription. Who knows what it would have cost? But as soon as it was approved, even before Propecia was out, I was on 1.25 milligrams, and that was, right in 1997.
Oh wow, it's really good documenting. So I guess the early days of your hair loss stack consisted of Finasteride, Rogaine, and you mentioned you were using Viviscal. And from this clinic, you had access to the low level red light laser therapy thing. From
Okay.
there, how did you come to experiment and look at RU-58841?
Yeah, I mean, it goes way back to the forums that were available online. I think I first came across, if I remember it correctly, it was regrowth.com, alt.baldspot, and hair loss help. And of course, I think it's still active, hair loss talk.
Hmm.
And I'm active on those forums. I like anybody else, as the internet was, getting started, you wanted to learn as much as possible. That's the way my brain works and thinks about things. Is, maybe it's, overly obsessing over this topic, but it just became a real point of curiosity. I mean, all the way through college, I had access to a local medical center, and I would go and I would look up. I, would spend my time doing my, homework there. It was a nice, quiet place to do work. And I would spend time going through and trying to learn about hair anatomy, scalp biopsies, surgical procedures, what might be in store for myself. And I remember being on the forums and, after my, at this point I'm graduated from school, I wanted to learn more about this. What's out there, what's being studied, what's being released. I mean, the internet was out there, but not with the latest and greatest information. And even if you could find something on PubMed, if
Mhm.
I'm recalling correctly, you couldn't necessarily get the full article. It's not like Sci-Hub existed, and you could just go download it or work through a paywall. You could do something like interlibrary loan, right, right from the library to get it from another source. If they had it on site, I would go and look it up. But it was through those forums and those interactions with people, total strangers online, where you would start to learn about, hey, there's a doctor in California. I think his name was Dr. Lee, and he got into some trouble, putting out, minoxidil 10 to 15%.
Oh, wow.
Azelaic acid, people talked about because there were some in vitro studies, showing that it had anti-5-alpha reductase activity.
Hmm.
Zoral, I think, was, ketoconazole was talked about there. And one of the active physicians in the groups, if I remember it correctly at the time, was Peter Proctor, who does hold patents, and he was big into looking at copper peptides and SODases and so forth. And as I was interacting, there were some really bright people that were on there. There were some crazies as well, but in particular, there was one fellow named Brian Shelton who was down in Texas, and Brian and I had some back and forths about the literature. I think I was hell bent on the idea that, hey, if we could just block out all the androgens, we'll get regrowth. And and he was probably the first person. I should say Brian Shelton, the late Brian Shelton. I think that there's an homage to some of his posts on Hair Loss Talk. He was a fellow that was really self-trained and a major contributor of as much evidence-based information. And I think he had done a consultation when I had spoken with him at one point with Dr. Proctor, because Dr. Proctor's down in Texas. And Brian was a big advocate to say, hey, look, anti-androgens are great, but there are people, back at that period of time, men who were transitioning, that were in a position where they were having all their androgens removed from their body and using everything that's available. And Brian was basically like, these people are not regrowing full heads of hair. So what do you think, RU-58841 or any other systemic flutamide is going to do in your system? Like, you're only going to get so much out of it. It's been maxed out. He wasn't saying it in these direct terms, but he was like, we probably topped out what we can do. So we need to really start thinking about things on the stimulant side. At the same time, I'm, stubborn. My background, I'm like, if I could get my hands on an anti-androgen, and I could get my hands on, at that point, Avodart was being talked about, and we knew that it was being studied and looked at. I'm like, we need a blockade on DHT.
Yeah.
And we could get a blockade with RU and with Avodart. Man, it's going to regrow. I know it. Again, despite having a background in reading the literature, I was still, kind of defiant with that thinking that, hey, I've been treating this for so long. I jumped right on it. I think I'm a great candidate, and I get my hands on these medications, so that's my exposure to RU, is that everybody kind of was like, what is going on? What's happening with this stuff? And there were people that were really hell-bent on either prodding the companies that were, involved with studying it and prompting them to get going with it, or figuring out a way to get their hands on it. And so all the way back in, the late 90s, early 2000s, that's, that was the crew that was online.
That's very parallel to what I see going on, today on, I guess the hair loss talk forums are still around, but you have Reddit's Tressless community. You even have other communities on some random online forums that were just created, recently. And you kind of have the, the same people, the same characters you describe for, I guess, this generation, people who are very enthusiastic about the literature, some people who are willing to try a lot of things, and take some very extreme measures to prevent the progression of their hair loss. I guess you can say halt the progression of their hair loss, if not, attempt to reverse it. But it's just interesting to see how the culture kind of, I guess, around hair loss talks and stuff like that kind of stayed the same throughout this time, really. And I would say, I guess that really falls in line with the current treatment we have, because we've only, proven treatments. We've only had like Minoxidil and Finasteride and Dutasteride, right? Outside of that, everything's very experimental. And I guess that's why we still have this sort of, sort of frozen discourse when it comes to these sort of medications. And still talking about topical anti-androgens. Because I think as of late, nothing has really been proven to be that effective. I've heard anecdotes about RU-58841. Certainly, there are people that post on Tressless about it, about how it's improved their hair. There are people who are very diehard about it, and there are people who have experienced their own side effects from RU-58841. So yeah, it's just really interesting to see how the online culture when it comes to talking about hair loss is, really hasn't changed that much in the past 20 years.
I would agree. From what I pick up on, it is, some people have hardened in their positions around things, or just haven't, kind of self-reflected on, the wisdom of what's being said. I wasn't reflecting on it at the time until I could try it out for myself and really, see what was possible or what wasn't. Again, so much wasn't known, but you do, you've got, in many of the forums, and this was my take, just, so many individuals, and I'd lump myself in. So it's not like I'm pointing a finger without, saying this about myself. Just your identity was your hair. It's your youth, it's your vitality. As I mentioned at the outset, I had acne all the way through high school. I feel like that experience was in its own way, dare I use the word traumatizing. But I almost felt like, high school years, some of that confidence I would have had, was a good athlete, some of that was taken away because I felt like, I'm contending with this, it's antibiotics, Accutane's helpful. Like when my skin was clear with that, I was confident. I was like, wow, yeah. And I get to college and wham, it's hitting me. I'm like, it's like a, 1-2 gut punch and right cross. You don't have to go any further than this past Friday night. The knockout punch, I was delivered on Ngannou.
Yeah, that was brutal.
That's what it felt like. Ooh,
Side note, what was he even thinking? Like MMA guy, no boxing his boxing training wasn't even that. I think Mike Tyson was giving him some tips or something, but it left much to be desired, is what I'm trying to say. Ngannou, that was a pretty
would
bad
say
fight.
that Fury carried him there a few months back. It's really what it looked like, and yeah, Joshua, he really, to me, it looked like, he wants to continue to get a payday. And he's not going to he's not going to carry this guy who's clearly made more money than he did in MMA.
Oh, definitely.
To do so. But when I saw that, I watched that live. That's what it felt like at the time. It was like, it's such an intense period. And, it's so true that male brain development, I think it's, talked about as still going on, your frontal brain development into your mid-20s. Maybe it's, I don't know, there's probably some give and take in the literature about that, but the intensity of things that were going on, whether it was girlfriends or relationships or jealousy, and the intensity that I felt around a whole number of different circumstances during that period, it was only amplified by feeling like something was being taken away from me. So when I see these online things going on, if a guy feels like he's in that, he's still trying to get his footing in life. And again, I'm talking about this from the male experience because that's what I feel like I can honestly speak to from the life that I lived, is that if you feel like, that's something that you don't have good control over or a good understanding for, and maybe other aspects of your life aren't coming together, you're just kind of clinging to that one thing that's holding you back from other areas of self-development that you really need to work on. And, if I could go back, 25, 30 years, there'd be a lot that I would have to say to that guy, about what needed to be done. A big brother mentor, with more experience in life would have said, hey, Kian, on this. So much has changed, over that period of time, but I think the entire community would benefit from, some of the other resources, and hopefully people really find that online, and it won't be as intense of an issue. And if they want to get the issue handled, boy, God, if you jump on it early now, ounce of prevention is worth, 1,000 pounds, as a cure.
Most definitely, yeah. It's always preached about, as soon as you see signs of just hair loss and thinning, just trying to address it at that moment, or however fast you can address it, would be very beneficial to just retaining your hair in the long run. Definitely.
I mean, I'm happy to jump into, how, how that culture and how I, did some outreach and wound up coming across the fella, who provided the RU.
Yeah, sure. You can go into that if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole topic of RU, really caught my eye because it looked like it was just in, I think what is the movie term, development hell forever. And it seemed like the thing that was beyond our reach that had such potential. And there were really ardent, believers in it online and other people that would just dismiss it. Like I said, the late Brian Shelton he was fantastic at explaining his points and so forth about that. But I still had it in my head. Well, there was one fella online. Again, I won't, I won't even name his handle or his name for, people will be looking for him online, but he started touting and talking about the idea that he had a connection, I think through a physician, that this physician had connections to a pharmaceutical company, and he maneuvered it somehow that they were going to produce RU-58841 all the way back in 2000, 2001. I mean, ordering stuff online was almost unheard of. I mean, it wasn't completely. I think I had trialed, although I didn't make mention of it, some topical spironolactone. It's where you would get the pills from India and crush it into isopropyl alcohol and, mix it in some variety, either in a cream and utilize it. I mean, that's about as close as you could come, to something at that point in time. But this guy was like, no, I had, again, private conversations with him. And he was like, no, I'm dead serious. I'm getting this done. And he's like, I'm going to get X number of grams of it. And you have to remember this period of time. I mean, as I look back at the post for hair loss help, you're talking about the baseline of being August 2001. Well, what happened September 11th, 2001? And so,
Oh yeah.
this guy had to ship powder to me. And so getting any kind of subsequent orders, knowing that the entire mail, US mail was going to be under investigation,
Yeah.
potentially for a hazard, was nerve wracking. So I think, at that point in time, it was just before all that went on, with 9/11, and, he had shipped that to me, and that's when all this kind of unfolded. But we'd come to an agreement. I said, look, I'll get a mass spec to look at the structure to make sure that this is exactly what you said.
Mhm.
He was very determined that this would be 100% pure stuff without any impurities because it was being made by a company. And he had to travel literally from where he was, in the country all the way down. He described mailing it to himself at the Mexico border,
Oh wow.
you know, to get this across. And he was so nerve wracked and, about it because had invested a large sum of money to getting it done. And sure enough, he got it back home. He chipped me 5 grams or so, and I wound up having it tested, through a legitimate company. And they said, yeah, this matches identically the chemical structure. And so we were off to the races at that point with going ahead and going about it. And what I think you'll link to as a part of this interview is the kind of the web page using the Wayback Machine, where it shows, well, how am I getting this? It was an expensive investment for myself at the time. I'm going to shave my head, and I'm going to give everybody a very clear view as to what my pattern of loss is. But I'm also like, I'm not going to waste any in my hair,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
not getting it to where I wanted to go. And so, it was dramatic at the time. And I remember my best buddy saying to me, like, why'd you shave your head? I'm like, well, you're not going to believe it, but there's this medication and it's available. And he's like, all right, man, go for it. He didn't know anything about it. But I'm like, yeah, I'm going to document this. I'd reached out to the owner of Hair Loss Help, and we put it on there, and it kind of documents my journey of growing the hair in, over that period of time, and what my stack was at the time, and how that kind of added up to being a part of things. But the major addition that was there, all the other things that are on there, were listed, were already things I was using, but RU was the new addition. And what was I going to get out of it? What was that going to look like ultimately? Was it going to lushly, come in at, at my front of my head and the temples and so forth? That's what I had my fingers crossed for.
Mhm.
I do feel like it was successful in thickening things up, and that's, some of what was documented, but certainly not to the extent where, I wanted to regrow where this had been at my hairline. I did not want to have a receding hairline, and well, that's still there today. So I can tell you that it did not successfully do that. If not, I would have continued to pursue the source of it. And at that point, I was like, yeah, well, I gave this the best try possible, and I hark back to those debates and conversations on hair loss help with Brian Shelton, and believe me, there were some lengthy ones. But he's right. We probably have maxed out what we can do, just with a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor in terms of regrowth. Again, just if you define it in terms of that versus stabilizing your hair loss, again, it depends. If you think about when I started treatment, I'm 19 years old, 1992, using Rogaine. Had I had my hands on it then, yeah, absolutely. I think it would have been very helpful at that point in time, because, we've been cutting it off, but it was, not until 1997. So you're talking about a 5-year window where
Yeah.
I had no Finasteride, no Propecia, nothing in terms of interrupting the fundamental process that we all know is at the heart of, really causing the hairs to miniaturize. I think I've done relatively well, and my plan is to provide you some, some updated photos, and I can talk about current things or other things that I've done from that period of time. But I feel like that window gave people an idea. It was an honest look at, let's see if you get this. We got a lot of things in place here. Let's see how well, this can do. And for me, my unique circumstance, I'm and as they say in clinical studies, an N of one. This is a case study. So
Mhm.
take it for what you will. And that's what the pictures show. And again, I'll have some updated photos, even from, I took photos from a dozen years ago, and I'll take some and provide, current day, and people can say one way or the other how they think things have played out.
Most definitely. I think just going back to RU and just going through this whole entire logistical nightmare to get the RU. I think it was a good idea that you got the mass spec done on the RU product, because I can say today, there's just a lot of just questionable stuff on the market, some of which coming from China, just random parts of the world. And occasionally people go through the whole mass spec or NMR process trying to get some sort of chemical fingerprint on what they're getting, and then they may find out that they're not even getting RU-58841. And I guess when it comes to these sort of side effects that people have been talking about lately, when it comes to chest pains and chest tightness, at least for me, this is one of the reasons why I was considering it before, but I was always a bit standoffish until I started seeing more reports, and people can say anything online, but when I went back looking at posts from the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, the 2010s, and then you start to hear the same thing, of this like underground hair loss drug kind of thing, it certainly made me worried, right? Because I don't think it was publicized enough, like it is today, for people to have some sort of widespread nocebo effect about this one particular condition that people keep talking about, chest pains after applying RU or something like that. And it's certainly, at least from my perspective, it's been more prevalent today, especially with the video that I did a deep dive a couple of videos ago talking about RU itself and its possible metabolites, and just the class of drugs that it came from. Specifically, I think it was Rousseau Rouclaf, the French pharmaceutical company that was researching RU-58841. The I guess you can say the batch in which RU-58841 came out of, it was a whole class of other anti-androgens, and a lot of them had, these weird issues that dealt with, lung toxicity and liver toxicity. So at least to me, it was always, at least after doing that, I can't even, at least for myself, use RU. But I can understand why people use it. Like, I see the anecdotes, I see people using RU dutasteride on like Reddit and other forums, and it does, in my opinion, at least from what we know from the stump-tailed macaca monkeys, our closest relative, I guess, species-wise, that can experience androgenetic alopecia, that study showed that there was improvement in terms of the terminal to vellus hair ratio. So yeah, that's just my spiel on it. Do you know anyone else who's used RU back in the day, back in the form days, by any chance?
Yeah, there was, I think just the fella that I worked with at the time, for lack of a better term, is his intensity around the issue and just his personality and, I wouldn't call them lack of results, but, I felt like at that point, Avodart was coming out about the same time, and I made the switch to getting it. So I didn't feel compelled, to continue on with it. But there was one other fella, and I think he was up in Canada, that had reached out to me and just wanted some insight as to, whether or not it was legitimate and whether or not he thought that working with the fella that I did at the time was a good idea. And I just said, here's, some cautionary, thoughts with regards to it. So, I mean, there was just so much noise online. It was hard to track who was doing it or who wasn't, but it seemed like there was a readily expanding number of individuals. And it does, if I remember correctly, it wasn't too far after that, maybe within 2 or 3 years, where chemical companies were popping up overseas that were providing people with it. And I just didn't have, a good feel for it. I think I was curious not more than a year ago, and I saw one company had offered it, and I said, you know what? I have this recollection in my head as to what it smelled like. And I'm going to order up a small batch of this for, again, dirt cheap compared to, what I paid. And I go, sure enough, I got it. And I go, yep. Just based on smell, I can recall all the way back to that period of time. Again, heightened perception of the world being September 2001. Like,
Yeah.
you just have imprint memory from what was going on. I'm like, this is probably it. I'm really going to use this stuff. I've gotten all the benefit that I feel like I need. But yeah, it had the same look, feel, smell, to it that I recalled. But yeah, this only one other guy that I knew, and I think he had fairly similar experience to me. Again, some people would probably say, looking at my photos and going through here, oh, you just grew your hair out, man. Yeah, but there was an entire rationale for that. And certainly if I can go back to before that, things have been well stabilized, and certainly some degree of loss over the last 20 plus years since this period of time. But I've tried to maximize, really the styling that I do, the length that I keep my hair. I think some of these photos, I would say, even as time goes along here, looking at them, I probably kept my hair even shorter with a 2-blade on the side, have my barber do that. I probably keep it at a 4 now. But it's pretty much the same style. I didn't feel like I have a lot of options. So I try and maximize that element to work in my favor as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean that's all we can really hope for right now. Slowing down or some sort of stabilization, and if you catch it as early as you can, potentially just maybe getting regrowth for a time being, right? I guess after you ceased using RE-58841, how did your stack look like? Did you move from Finasteride to, I think you mentioned previously in this discussion, how Avodart Dutasteride was coming to market to some extent? Did you make the transition over to Avodart? Did you update any other aspects of your hair loss stack?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was interesting because obviously I still had, access to Propecia, through that particular clinic that I worked with. And Avodart, to go to my primary care physician and ask for it, I just couldn't see doing it. Like they weren't at the time, like, it was a relatively new medication. So I said, okay, what are my options? Well, of course, the overseas options
Yeah.
were still available, Dr. Reddy's. And so then the question was going to come, how quickly were they going to put it out?
hmm
And would I be willing to make that leap instead of dealing with trying to convince my primary, to prescribe it? Again, at that point, I'm, what is it here? 3 years ago. Yeah, I mean, I'm in my late 20s. So convincing my doctor to prescribe it and say that I've got BPH and pass that, again, that wasn't gonna fly. And the hair loss clinic, that I had worked with, they weren't going about prescribing it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna use Dr. Reddy's, if I remember correctly. And so then you've got this thing in your hand and you're like, okay, how do I know that this is legit?
Yeah.
Well, if I hop off Propecia and I've been using this, knowing what we know about the pharmacodynamics, to the best extent that we did at the time, I I think I had gotten during this period of time prior to Avodart getting approved, I did blood work and I did see where my DHT was low.
Mhm.
And theoretically, if I hopped on this bogus treatment, this Dutas from overseas, I'm going to see that number go up. Well, it was even lower after. So I knew that at the very least, it was blocking the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. At the same time, whether or not it was causing me other health issues, that have shown up later in my life, uh, we knew it was doing. It was what it was,
Yeah, it's more
and what I've come
potent.
to learn. I'm sorry.
No, I just said, yeah, way more potent. Yeah.
Absolutely, like it really crashed the number way down. In terms of DHT, it was very low, and this was, I think, a couple months after starting it. So, and I I remember at the time I wound up sharing that on the forum. I'm like, "Yep, it's legit. I can tell you that much." My DHT is that's how information was shared at the time. And at a certain point, I did go to my primary because I didn't want to keep doing that. I don't know. I can't remember how long that lasted, and I might not have been more than 30. And I said, "Look, doc, I'm willing to pay for this if the insurance doesn't, but I'd like to be on this." And we had a really good relationship. And yeah, I've, for, from age 30 until now, and I'm in my early 50s. Yeah, I've been on it and been prescribed it, and that's been a regular part of my stack from that period of time. Not much had changed. Minoxidil foam came out in 2006. I'd intermittently, I think maybe been on a quarterly program using the laser. I think the laser comb got approved in 2013, so I had initially ordered one of those up. And I look back in some of my ordering history from online, and I knew all the way back from the early 2000s about Derma roller.
Oh, really? Wow.
That Yeah, it was talked about in the forums, but it was like a European product. And I remember seeing slides about it and people posting, but there was just no companies that had that available. And it wasn't until I think 2013 that I actually started utilizing that, integrating it. I mean, thinking back to when this RU experiment was done, I would have used it hand in hand with that, optimize the absorption, that would have come with it. Whether or not
Mhm.
that would have affected anything, who knows? Whether or not there's, benefit to derma roller. Again, I know it's hotly contested and debated. I always felt like it was helpful to a certain extent. And then, to fast forward 2018, is when I ordered the laser Messiah helmet. um, and have used that pretty regularly throughout. And I know, again, it's highly debated as to whether or not it's helpful. For me, it's been a part of my stack in one form or another. It's not terribly inconvenient to use a few days a week for 15 minutes.
Mhm.
And and interestingly enough, just my family health history does have hypertension, and Lonatin, oral minoxidil is not going to be on the agenda for my cardiologist. but as a part of my makeup and managing that, for the last several years, I've been on spironolactone
I see.
orally. So that when the doctor said, "Oh, we've got this medication we're going to put in," I was like, "Oh yeah, no problem." Sure. You know, yeah, I've got my own reasons for thinking, yeah, that'll be fine. We'll stay on that. So maybe that's helped me overall. Again, it's not terribly strong effect. I'm more interested in making sure my blood pressure is exactly where it needs to be. Yeah, but other than that, not a lot else in terms of trying things out. I mean, the Nano shampoo, I haven't used Proxen, that product of Dr. Proctor's in a long time, but I like his shampoo. I like the way it smells. Whether or not that's been helpful,
Mhm.
in my overall skin or health or otherwise, I can't say. But yeah, that's been it, and that's how I've been, relatively stabilized for the last, 20-25 years.
Wow. Did you notice any sort of side effects when you were using finasteride or dutasteride?
Yeah, nothing dramatic.
Mm.
I know all the talk about PFS that's out there. Mm, No, nothing, not in terms of, I'll say it, not in terms of performance or otherwise. Would I have expected, volume to go down over the last period of time, at this stage of my life? Yes. Do I think that that probably has a bigger impact, now, relatively speaking, but not in any other way, leading up to that,
Mhm.
that period of time did I feel like, oh, this is knocking me out of commission. And obviously you've had, a whole series of products that are available now, to help guys that are in that circumstance. But a lot of guys use that recreationally now anyways, even if, you know, it's not so much a problem as, hey, I just want to be able to perform, to perform better. Those products being like Cialis and Viagra and so forth. I mean,
Mhm.
that stuff is out there. It's available. So no, in terms of mood or what guys describe, online in terms of that. Again, I'm not being dismissive at all of as to their unique experience. But again, I would hark back to what I said a while back in our interview: is that it's a really intense period of time,
Yeah.
in your life, and it's easy for psychosocial factors come in to your life experience, and it's, I think if I was experiencing that at the time, I would have questioned whether or not it was the medication versus just brain biochemistry, going on. That period of time, it makes a real serious imprint on us as to, what's going on. And but I would have traded keeping my hair. I feel like that would have made me happier than anything. Thinking back to when I had my acne handled with Accutane, I felt like I was on top of the world. It's like the same thing. If I could have just grown all my hair back, I would have solved all my problems. It wouldn't have solved all my problems. There still would have been plenty of challenges and rejection in life that you were going to have to contend with, and heartbreak and otherwise. It just, that's life. You're going to have to deal with it. It's not going to, cure all. It's not going to turn your personality or your status in your local community, overnight. It's one particular component. And I'll say this, for the time that I've spent over the last 15, 20 years, as I'm in my, my 50s now, the most successful guy that I've ever been around, bald, completely bald,
Mhm.
and and with, women 20 plus years younger than himself, and just his personality, his ability to do certain things. Uh, it wasn't money, it was status relative to the environment that he was in. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of male self-help groups that are out there and available, and they talk about this kind of stuff, setting yourself up in a great position. And let me tell you, this guy, he didn't need any hair. He had other features, probably had some height and nice eyes or otherwise, but 100%, I was standing right there next to him with well stabilized, you know, relatively well stabilized hair loss, and he
Mhm.
was outclassing me. There were times where I outclassed him. We were buddies for a period of time, but I can tell you, it's not the defining factor. If I would say anything, there's a lot of other mechanisms if people are hanging their hat on, lack of success. It's not in absolute terms. It might not be helping you, but it's not absolutely hurting you either.
True, yeah. I would say that, just the degree in which people are just connected today when it comes to online dating and social media, I think the landscape certainly, at least in my opinion, has vastly changed to how it was like a decade ago or even 2 decades ago. So I can, at least from my perspective, I can understand why, some men, especially the younger you are going through this sort of condition, they have this intense feeling as you describe it, just dealing with their hair loss, right? Today, looks have become, in many ways, just the deciding factor of, of many interactions. It's not the end all be all, and I certainly think there are quite the. I'll just say there's some people online that take it to its extreme ends, and they start to become very nihilistic about everything, and that's certainly not helping them as well. But yeah, just in general, just how things are marketed to us, just how things are, right in front of our faces, especially with these advertisements. And I think before we started recording, I was asking you, you ever saw those classic Rogaine commercial ads where they would attempt to play on insecurities and stuff like that? I think all of that, at least today, is just very amplified. So for the person that is facing hair loss, it's kind of like a reminder of, these are supposed to be your formative years, your 20s, 30s, whatever. And here you are dealing with a condition that we think for whatever reason only older people, quote unquote, deal with. But it's like, alopecia, anyone, whether it's androgenetic or, areata or whatever, it can strike at any time in a person's life.
Absolutely. It's a real, as I described, a real punch in the gut. It felt like, an absolute knockout at that period of time. And, for guys, as you're talking about with online dating or otherwise, I mean, there's entire, I can't think of the book that was released, but there's been a lot of chatter about it online. I mean, if you study a lot of the evolutionary psych guys that are doing male coaching, again, I'm not going to name them by name or otherwise, but they talk about a lot of that data, that, what do they say? Women are only swiping on 3 to 5% of guys, maybe 20%, and everybody else is just getting, it's at first glance, so you're feeling it if you're on there and you're not getting responses, you're not getting matched, with someone. And, what somebody's perception of what they believe who they can mate with or be with or date, whether that's for short term or long term, it's very much so influenced by that. And so if you're trying to maximize, how you look and how you are, and you're going through that experience, I can't even imagine that from, during that period of time. It just wasn't around for myself during that period, but it just would have been an extra, kick in the teeth, to feel like, wow, I want to be able to present myself in the best possible light, and this is holding me back from, from doing so. But there's a lot of reasons why people select, women select guys. It's not entirely limited to that. And, there's other ways in which you can, I'll use the term self-maximize, that are out there that you can go about. But it's one of those ones that it'll age you more quickly. And I know Kevin in Hair Cafe has covered some of that in terms of his talk, and it's very, very real experience. And I'm not, taking away from that, because it certainly is a big part of things for me. And that's why I think, some of, again, not to put down PFS or otherwise, but there are many conditions that are not well known, but just, I think the over intensification around how frequently someone might be experiencing, adverse effects or impacts from that, and really certain people just going out of their way to scare people away from, the conventionally proven treatments. It breaks my heart, in so many ways to hear and see that. I myself probably would have ignored it and plowed right on ahead. but knowing that guys are probably looking at that and thinking that their entire hormone system is being wrecked, and as you used the term before, nocebo.
Yeah.
You know, SIBO is real, and so is nocebo. You put a negative idea in somebody's head about something, and it can catch fire. And you know, there's a lot of things like that that are out there that become a self-fulfilling prophecy for guys. And you know, it's unfortunate because you know it you know, it speaks to, you know, the hope and the desire to have better treatments, you know, out there that
Exactly.
are available that aren't systemic, you know, that, you know, whether it's RU or, you know, some of the other drugs that you've covered, you know, online. It would be tremendous to have them as potential, you know, resources. But you also see where all this negative coverage, you know, on finasteride likely kept, you know, Avodart from being an approved hair loss treatment.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it would be outstanding. It probably prevents it from being, you know, injected and done with mesotherapy, and having somebody really develop either an updated version that has a lower Dalton number that can very easily be derma rolled into the scalp and have a half-life that maybe instead of 5 weeks is 3 to 6 months,
Yeah.
and it just acts locally. Wouldn't that be great? Companies are going to look at it and say, I'm not going to deal with these lawsuits over this. We've got other things. We got bigger fish to fry. There's a bigger return on GLP-1 medications. We
Yeah.
can clean up on that. We're not going to bother with this. That's the real downstream negative that comes from some of that, I would say, which
D-
again may or may not be founded.
No, I think you make a really good point. The lawsuits that Merck was facing regarding the allegations of post-finasteride syndrome. When it comes to attempting to combat these sort of hair loss conditions, I think we have to accept the fact that we have to, we have to do something to our biology to prevent it from destroying our hair follicles, right? If we want to stimulate the hair follicle, we have to use some sort of growth stimulant, whether that's Minoxidil or whatever they're talking about now with Scoob3 or some sort of thyroid mimetic hormone that we can put on our scalps that they're, whatever they're researching, or whether it's with GT229, where you destroy the androgen receptor, all these things down the pipeline. If it comes to the point where these pharmaceutical companies, even with rigorous research and, tons of data that they go through, if they honestly go through the clinical trial process and they honestly have their data assessed by, the Food and Drug Administration of various, countries, and if they're still facing lawsuits or they're still facing skepticism, I think it's going to cause them to, again, it's kind of like pull back their research or just maybe not invest as much time and effort into, trying to solve hair loss. I mean, hair loss sucks. It's annoying to deal with. But like you said, there are other conditions that are, much more, I would say, lucrative and, much more serious, right? Cancer conditions particularly. And I think society would probably lean towards treating that before treating hair loss. But I want to go back to one point with PFS. In the early days of those forums you were on, did you notice anyone talk about any sort of post-finasteride like condition? Because my suspicion is that social media has kind of amplified this nocebo to the point where now you're having the narratives of, the nocebo narratives of post-finasteride syndrome kind of being on par with the scientific validity of finasteride and dutasteride when it comes to combating hair loss. So did you notice any sort of discussions of PFS in the early 2000s?
I would say that there was some low-level chatter about that sort of thing. I think so many people were excited to have a treatment that, they were really hopeful for, that kind of outweighed, a lot of that, not to the degree to which people are catastrophizing, you know, uh, things now on online, and the amplification of the messaging. And, when you see, legitimate sources, whether that's Peter Attia or the Huberman Lab, podcast, covering the topic, it just elevates it, that much more. but to answer your question, I just not as much. No, I didn't see those reports. And if people were bringing up stuff like that, I feel like, more people were honest in their self-assessment about, their mental health and their background, and say, well, I do have a lot of anxiety. I do have this, and would self-reflect on it. Whereas now you've got, a three-letter term that you can hang on to, boom,
Yeah.
quickly, and they're an entire, okay, this is what it is. It's like, it's like, oh, my girlfriend broke up with, my girlfriend broke up with me when I was 20. It was clearly my hair loss. I'm hanging my hat on that. Oh, I feel anxiety or depressed. I started taking this medication. I'm going to hang my hat on that. Again, it's, kind of a more, unfortunately, myopic view of, what's transpiring, rather than, again, stepping back. And a lot can be said for, the advent of phones over the last, and just
Yeah.
immediate gratification, and the way in which we process information without first saying, wait a minute, let me think about thinking. Let me step back from what I'm experiencing right now, and how much can I say this is actually a part of it. Because again, the half-life and the return to normalcy in terms of your hormones should tell you a lot about, what's transpiring, within your system. And, I think Kevin does a good job of covering a lot of that with regards to neurosteroids, and, you can't assign blame to, a medication, that's only acting on the type 2 5-alpha reductase. If you're
Exactly.
saying neurosteroids and you feel like it's, you know, in the brain where it's primarily type 1, it doesn't add up in terms of that. And there's clear deception and sleight of hand going on with some of the people that are promoting, that, that idea. It's, it was out there, but again, you look at the double blind placebo randomized control trials. That's our gold standard. It's not that we dismiss case studies or otherwise, they're helpful case series, but that's where the truth likely is within it, that certain people just are experiencing something, and it's more likely than not associated with just some other aspect of their physiology, and not necessarily causation. Again, people making the leap from correlation to causation, it's a bigger leap than I think some realize.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. And at least to me, when I started thinking about, these older forms, I wonder if this whole post-finasteride syndrome thing, I wonder if it exists in other countries. Like, I'm sure Japan, they have their own, actually, I have some subscribers who are from Japan, and some who actually look at Japanese content. They floated the idea, if post-finasteride syndrome is even talked about in other countries, whether it's more so some sort of a condition where only people who speak English and who are aware of this condition actually speak about it, right? Because it comes to mind, and it's what's prevalent here in our sector of things. So it really, gets me thinking about the narratives at play here, and how it really builds up people's fears around this particular drug. Because, like you said before, the intensity in which people start to feel, these feelings, going through hair loss, having anxiety about, your hair loss, about your social standing, and just people, some people just being more anxious than others. It gives something to blame. All of your issues, even your own hair loss issues, could be pinned on finasteride, and just trying to write it off and never looking at it again, or even using it or interacting with it. It's a convenient way to just say, oh, I have PFS, and that's why I'm not using that, rather than just accepting, okay, maybe you do have some sort of condition, but it's not as, serious as you're describing it, at least in this sort of physiological sense, when it comes to the interaction between 5-alpha reductase and testosterone. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is, people kind of there's too much fear around finasteride, right? I think people have to really assess where they are before they even try this treatment. I think it's definitely helpful to go through some sort of, psychological counseling about your hair loss, if it really is something that inhibits you from living your life. I think that's probably a better step, to go that direction, and then maybe consider, finasteride. That's just, my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that, doing a good self-assessment as to where you are in your life, how this fits in, that this isn't going to solve everything in terms of what you have to do, because a lot of the solutions are going to require a lot of hard work, to where you want to get in life, the relationships that you want to have, that it's, if things aren't going your way, and this is one of them, yes, it can have a negative impact, but there's work that you're gonna have to do. If it was, perfect panacea and it just regrew all our hair, you might find on the other side of that, there's, wow, things still aren't going my way. Well, that tends to be life. you know, anticipate, friction. What is the term that I said? It's rough out here in these streets. It's it's not easy. It's competitive world. There's going to be friction. There's going to be, circumstances where other people have it easier, and like I said, other circumstances where guys don't have the same advantages as you, and are still doing better. It's like, where's the disconnect? What's happening here? If you go down that path, towards self-improvement, there's a lot of good information that's out there. There's a lot of fluff. There's a lot of woe is me as well.
Mhm.
But if you can, really look yourself in the eye, with that, you can get a more serious assessment on self and on this issue in particular. It's tough. I think more than ever we need really good mentors out there that
Yeah.
can help guide people. I know that I've got, some younger relatives from my family, and I intend on being exactly that. Whether that's, a great uncle, and just available to them, so that if they're hitting these difficult points, how are you going to navigate it? How are you going to help somebody,
Mhm.
see their way through the storm?
I definitely agree. Yeah, mentorship is needed, not just when it comes to this hair loss stuff, but just in general, and helping people form their lives and really outline their goals and how to, I guess, properly uh, just reach for them.
Uh, and one of the things I wanted to cover with you, that thinking about to the forums all the way
Hmm.
back, and something that's come to light now. I remember, and I swear this, in the early 2000s, Osteopontin
Oh
coming up
yeah.
as a topic, as a potential hair growth stimulant. And, as I've followed it online, I'm looking at, I think it is the product, which is, a derivative that's of osteopontin,
Yeah.
that the company, I think it was Follicum, was going to FOL005, is basically that they took what they thought was the active component to it. And they've been working on getting it approved, and I know that there's some new chatter around that. And then I'm looking at the research from Max Plikus, again, viewing the videos, seeing some of his presentations, reviewing at least the synopsis of the article, and seeing what Amplifica is pursuing. They're pursuing actual osteopontin as opposed to Scoob 3, which all the hype, came out around. And I'm just saying to myself, I'm like, does Max Plikus know about Follicum? Like, and does Follicum know about what Max Plikus is up to? Like, it just seems like this treatment, it's either going to be a dud, a complete dud. Like, it's either got its own set of problems around molecular weight and deliverability and chemical stability, and just, the possibility of it working. But I mean, that's what Amplifica, they're studying first, is they're looking at osteopontin straight away. And they're skipping Scoob 3, from my understanding on things. Is, kind of, what is your understanding for, what FOL005, how that might be different. I've seen some interviews online, and just, it's almost like Amplifica's going down this path, and I'm not really sure where they wind up with it.
Yeah, I
In
mean,
terms of,
I honestly, the whole thing about Scoop 3, I'm not even sure if they're in clinical trials yet. Maybe I could be wrong, but the last time I heard, they were trying to set up some sort of phase 1 kind of clinical trial with Scoop 3. I Admittedly, I haven't seen any sort of update regarding Scoop 3 or Osteopontin. I'm not entirely sure, but when I look at AMP3, I think it's AMP303 from Amplifica, I think it's likely a distinct molecule separate from Osteopontin, and this molecule could very well be Scoop 3. So when used alongside Osteopontin, maybe Scoop 3 has the potential to enhance hair growth signaling significantly. I'm not entirely sure on that. But looking at FOL005 from Follicum, it might function in another way analogous to Scoop 3, boosting Osteopontin expression and maybe consequently stimulating hair follicle growth effectively. But again, I'm not entirely too sure about that. I'm not sure how they're going about signaling the hair follicle to actually activate. I guess dormant hair follicles to actually activate here. But I would think that it's Scoop 3 induces Osteopontin, and then that leads to positive growth factors for the hair follicle. That's for the Amplifica kind of research pipeline. And then for Follicum, it would be the FOL005. I think it's a like peptide or whatever. That specific molecule stimulates the expression of Osteopontin, or maybe it's some sort of Osteopontin adjacent kind of molecule that can signal to the hair follicle to actually grow. But yeah, it seems kind of convoluted, this entire thing.
Read this, because it AMP203 is what they're leading with in terms of studying. They're not leading with Scoop 3. As part of the compound highlighted in Nature publications designated as AMP203 at Amplifica Perplicus is an osteopontin-based compound that is under preclinical development. Amplifica will be initiating clinical development program to evaluate the safety of its core in the calendar of 2023. Amplifica is in the early stages of clinical development. This was a while back. They were actually in some subsequent, this was in June. I had seen some things as late as the fall. Where that their clinical trial was going to be wrapping up in Q1 2024.
Oh, so they already had the clinical trial for Osteopontin.
They are. Needles are were injected into people, and it was a full-on phase 2, because I think Dr. Rassman was a part of that. And he did a brief interview where I saw something. He also did a more extensive interview with Gary Linkoff, Dr. Linkoff in New York City. Mm-hmm. And I think he got into that a little bit about them being that far along. He didn't sound, he wasn't hyping it up as the next great thing, but I was just kind of surprised by it. So I'll be interested as you delve into it a little bit more, and as if I can share some more information with you.
Definitely, yeah. I'll have to look more into this, because from my understanding, the last time I looked, I thought they were still going through with Scoop 3, but it looks like they kind of silently switched. So it's kind of interesting. Now, is it that Osteopontin activates Scoop 3, or
I think what they found in the Nature article. Yeah, I think let's see, molecules. Yeah, I can't remember where I had read it. I'd have to go back, but yeah, something about it they felt, was maybe stimulatory of existing follicles, versus where Scoop 3 really talked about forming new ones. And maybe they saw something, just again, my pure speculation, that because Scoop 3 is identified at some level with cancer development, and maybe Osteopontin simply, safer and more stimulatory of existing follicles versus, hey, we're trying to build entirely new mini organs in your skin.
From my understanding, I think Scoop 3 is supposed to stimulate some, I guess, the positive growth factors of the Wnt pathway. I would have to look back into this because it's been a while since I actually looked at Scoop 3. But there was this whole talk of using Scoop 3 to transform resting hair follicles into active ones. So, there's this, people say that, even on bald scalps or parts of the scalp that, haven't been growing for a while, you do have dormant hair follicles, and there could be a way to kind of stimulate them and turn them, into growing hairs once again. And I guess one of the pathways or molecules that they've discovered was the Scoop3. In this case, the human variant, because I'm pretty sure Scoop3 already existed prior to this. This wasn't like any sort of unique discovery of like a new molecule. They just found out that this particular molecule has a purpose in partially regulating hair follicle development. But yeah, I would have to look more into this because I haven't heard that much news from Scoop3 or Dr. Maxim Plickus.
Yeah, I have a feeling that we'll hear something probably by the summer if this was positive in terms of it. But I think in rereading this again, they talk about it being an osteopontin based compound in his answer. So
based compound, so not necessarily osteopontin.
Yep. So I find that.
So is Scoop3 an osteopontin based compound?
I think it's separate. I think it's seen as a protein all together on its own.
Oh man, again, I wish they were more clear in these articles, these news articles.
Yeah. I feel like I want to enroll in one of his classes.
I think he's at Irvine, right?
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to do a remote learning. Yeah, I'm going to just quiz him nonstop.
Honestly, I would
get out of here.
I would definitely try to reach out to him if I'm able to, just to see if. I mean, it would be cool to have him on just to see, what he thinks, or what he can share about the clinical trials. Because I'm pretty sure, I'm not sure how it's working out. Did they sell these findings to Amplifica? Is he on the Amplifica team? Was he just working at UC Irvine? I kind of forgot the lore behind this particular discovery.
Yeah, well, I guess they worked with a company to form Amplifica because they had to spin it out of the university. And Dr. Rassman, he is on the board with them, so he's an early investor and advisor. And Plickus is like the head of, the medical. So it's kind of like, okay, we're separating this from the university as its own thing. Now we can go out and we can get funding. And they've done at least 1 or 2 rounds of funding. So it's the same key people that are involved, just under Amplifica as opposed to doing it through university. And my understanding, that's a lot of how this biotechnology is, developed and set up, is that basically a firm will help you get it started. So it seems to have happened so quickly that they knew that they had something that was looking good. And it's like Amplifica was, boom, formed.
Yeah, they're really pushing for it.
Yeah, by the way, we're rolling right into preclinical development. Like, we think that this is going to move. That it's the confidence in which, and the science and technology that they use to arrive at the point of understanding these, different, chemicals roles, these molecules and what they do, that it's like, hey, even if this isn't a home run, we need to set up because we're going to find the next round of things that are really going to do it. So that's my take. But I just, the entire follicum, are they just going to say, look, we're outclassed here. we're just gonna pack it in because we don't have a deliverable, or are they just going to charge ahead? Which, again, I read some things online that makes it seem like they're gonna move ahead with it. Just be really curious to see how that plays out. To me, it speaks to the confidence in which, somebody feels like they have something, and his background and otherwise, and the team that they put together really seems pretty impressive.
Yeah, definitely. That's, what would this be, like a growth stimulant? Or because if it's regenerating hair follicles, it's kind of, I guess that would be kind of a growth stimulant. Getting that new density in those areas would be pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, to me is the biggest thing, whether it was thinking about myself and kind of just, we know anti-androgens are just kind of maxed out what they can do, and we just need stronger stimulants. Is it a question of can these molecules, do they recruit stem cells
Hmm.
to be active in that area, or if they're truly dormant, do they just need a switch to get turned back on? And I think somewhere, whether it's this interview or otherwise, the feeling was, hey, it'll work for a while, and then you'd have to come back in and have this done again. So it's like to keep that switch.
Oh, hey guys, it's me. I'm actually editing the video right now, but I just want to jump in here real quick. I'm going to include the segment of my video that John was referring to. So this is a video that I made about, I would say, nearly a year ago, maybe like 9 months ago, where I was talking about the potential use case if we have GT229 and Scoop 3, and how there may or may not be some sort of intricate dance to, if Scoop 3 works, we can bring back the hair follicles, the dormant ones, but maybe there is some sort of stimulation of the androgen receptor that is required for these hair follicles to come back and start growing normally. But if that's the case, then we may or may not have to modulate the DHT levels in the scalp by using something like Dutasteride or Finasteride. I'm just going to include that segment here real quick so you guys can listen to, that part of the video that John's referring to. So thanks for the compliment, John, and thank you guys for listening. I'm going to jump out now so you guys can listen to that segment, and then I'll come back and resume the rest of the interview.
How much faith do
One thing I will say is we don't really know if these hairs would potentially still need the androgen receptor in order to work with Scoop 3. So this is just my thinking. This is my personal opinion. I think there needs to be some sort of intricate dance between hair regeneration and androgen receptor activity. And it is conceivable that during the regenerative phase, hair follicles might require some sort of stimulation from the androgen receptor to return to their native productive state. Thus, while Scoop 3 stimulates hair growth, it might be essential to reduce the presence of DHT during that sort of rebooting process. So using medications like Finasteride or even Dutasteride, I think, is still going to be in play. However long that period will have to be, I don't know. I think there definitely will be some more research as the clinical trials for Scoop 3 continues, as well as for GT229, and hopefully things go well for these two potential treatments. So yeah, once you have your Scoop 3 turning on your dormant hair follicles, it might be essential to keep taking Finasteride and Dutasteride, because we don't really know if the androgen receptor is still needed to bring back these hair follicles. But assuming that the androgen receptor is still needed, you keep using your Scoop 3, bring back your hair follicles. Maybe a couple rounds of Scoop 3 will promptly bring them back. And then after that, when the hair follicles are there, you target your scalp with GT229 to degrade and remove the androgen receptors, effectively shielding the hair follicle from the miniaturizing effects of DHT binding. And a potential upside that I see here is that once the periodic Scoop 3 treatment rounds are done for a hypothetical patient, they may only require non-daily, possibly weekly applications of GT229. So in essence, while the prospect of using Scoop 3 to reawaken dormant hair follicles and GT229 to safeguard them from subsequent miniaturization is enticing, a delicate balance might be required. This balance ensures that the hair follicles receive the necessary stimulation that may or may not be needed through the androgen receptor while they're trying to be rebooted with Scoop 3, all while taking Finasteride or Dutasteride to reduce the presence of DHT for those hair follicles that are coming back online, and then after that targeting the hair follicles with GT229 to essentially keep them there. And I think I've been reiterating this point over and over again, but I just want to give the idea of at least how I can see these two medications or treatments going hand in hand and potentially curing androgenetic
And that is
alopecia.
how.
Okay, so that was that particular segment. And now, just to come back in, we're going to resume the interview in 3, 2, 1. Let's proceed. Thanks.
Ask
That's
me
been a while. I think I made that video like a year ago now. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I'm starting to remember. Yeah, that's... If that is the case, like, for me, I've kind of updated my thoughts a bit since then. Particularly, I have this sort of suspicion that estrogens are more so of a growth factor than testosterone when it comes to, just stimulating the hair follicle or keeping it in anagen longer. I was thinking, okay, if we use GT229 to destroy the androgen receptor,
Ask myself,
what
like,
way could we signal to the hair
just
follicle to
kudos
stay in
to
anagen
you.
and keep growing? Would we still need to use the androgen receptor to tell the hair follicle to, hey, keep growing hair? And the only reason why I question this is primarily due to Dr. I think his name is Dr. Hamilton, a study on male castrates. Essentially, if males were castrated before puberty, they would never develop androgenetic alopecia. The ones that had mild androgenetic alopecia after puberty who were castrated, they sort of retained to their hair, and in some cases, they kind of grew back some hair. So that makes me question if testosterone is really needed, if androgens are really needed for the scalp hair follicles to develop properly.
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming male castrate doesn't have that much testosterone interaction with the hair follicle's androgen receptor compared to what we could get out of a GT229, right?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then at least to me, I don't think testosterone is really necessary when it comes to, I mean, I don't know, but these things, you're just kind of shooting in the dark sometimes, but I don't think it's really necessary when it comes to stimulating the hair follicle. But I've seen more evidence of estrogens and just, the number of estrogen receptors we have in our hair follicles, it being much more of a growth stimulant, so to speak, right? If you look at the scanning electron microscope of hairs from people of the same race, but if you look at the different genders, it tends to be that women have longer hairs, they're much more wider, and they just stay in anagen longer. And that sort of connection that I see there is, okay, estrogen is certainly doing something to the hair follicle to make it prolong how long it's growing, essentially, right? So I'm just not entirely sold on the whole idea of testosterone being a growth stimulant or a possible growth stimulant for scalp hair follicles.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see. I'm curious. I think that despite all the research and so forth that's gone on over the last even 2 or 3 decades, it's not clear. And I think Kevin covered in one of his videos talking about, I can't remember if it was IGF or, some molecule that was different in vitro versus in vivo, and just whether or not, certain molecules might be helpful in one phase and unhelpful in another.
Oh yeah, I think I
And
know
it's
what you're
like,
talking about. Yeah.
it's like, how, is there, just certain, is the timing of these things, really important. So that, I don't know if those questions are even close to being, answered as part of it, but just what is the, the expression of that? Again, it might be it's both helpful and unhelpful. And we just hope that it's not too, the absence of it wouldn't be too unhelpful.
Yeah.
To the process.
Yeah, there's just so many steps in just the growth pathway, right? You're looking at the Wnt pathway, the positive factors that actually go to one, building the hair follicle, and to the hair follicle actually producing hair. I don't think it's fully enumerated. We kind of have the idea of what's going on. Like this molecule is noted for positive growth factor. This one is noted for negative growth factor, right? But there is a degree of like, at what point in what cycle are these molecules relevant? And I just think that's, where the overall research is. I think the research right now is focusing on how can we develop drugs to effectively target the Wnt pathway. And if we can do that in a way that's safe, that's not going to like kill anyone, that could definitely make the difference. I think that could probably solve a lot of hair loss conditions.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think for myself, just reflecting back, the idea that we had, Finasteride, Dutasteride, and again, notwithstanding the issue of legal issues, that companies have run into, around developing drugs that we touched on earlier, the idea that just even by accident, somebody would have found something the way they did with minoxidil. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is great. And we put it into a formulation and it was super helpful. Like the idea that even by accident, with all the development that's gone on, that didn't happen in the last 20 years, I still am dumbfounded by. I'm still really surprised that, there wasn't something that, was, 30% better than Rogaine and just really just displaced it in the market and didn't have any of the negative, impact, that might come with androgen based these treatments, that it just came out and, hey, this is the upgrade, and you're off and running. Didn't happen. Nothing. Nobody, like, even by accident.
Yeah, I guess there needs to be a few more accidents before we get there, to be honest. No, like I definitely hear you on that. I mean, there is Verteporfin, right?
Yeah.
Verteporfin originally it was for age-related macular degeneration. But then they found out that it could be used to prevent scars, slow down the healing process, which would lead to scarless tissue. And now that intersection coming into play with hair transplants, it looks like from the case studies from Dr. Bloxham and Dr. Barghouthi that you're starting to see this sort of different kind of tissue, something that isn't really, maybe intermediate between scar tissue and normal tissue, but there being signs of hair follicles coming back from those extracted, donor areas. Honestly, I think that is a very, promising sort of treatment that we have readily on the market because verteporfin's already been FDA approved. It's being used off label for this particular, treatment. So my fingers are crossed with that. If verteporfin can significantly improve donor area after hair transplantations, to me that, even if it's like 25%, 50%, that can make the difference for so many people. But I think it's also the long-term observation of, okay, what are those hair follicles doing that come out of that verteporfin treatment? Are they acting the same? Will they only be around for like 2 cycles and then, they're gone? I think there's just so many questions that have yet to be answered, but certainly I think it's promising. I think it's promising.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I'd be so curious to see, even just studying it in a small scale, whether you could deliver something, like that, using a derma roller.
Oh yeah.
What is the molecular size there? And I'd be really curious, again, put it on this, pluck vellus hair out, take it out of an area, do that within a 1-inch square centimeter, say, okay, we're removing these hairs altogether. Now we're going to put in some verteporfin, and let's see whether or not there's anything to it, just the mere process of repair going onto the area. Is there any kind of signaling that's going on here? And if you started to see terminal hair come into areas that there wasn't, I would just be so curious about that, because, I mean, eh, you know, is there something to that? And again, would those hairs still have DHT sensitivity, but with our current set of treatments, could those be protected?
Yeah.
It's like the next step that you would see. I'd be fascinated to see if somebody, tries that out, because they could do a case series on, a number of patients and look at that, very specifically, without it being a formal study, and just say, we're gonna try this out. We're gonna extract some hairs from areas that are not donor hairs and see if this is stimulative.
Definitely. Yeah. I hear you on that. For me, it's like, I would think that the hair that does come back would have some sort of characteristics to whatever previous, I guess you can say, maybe cell lineage that was there before. So the previous hair follicle, maybe there's some sort of stem cell or niche environment that would recreate a hair follicle that is still somewhat characteristic of its previous, I guess the previous hair follicle that was there before, but would it be a much younger hair follicle such that, it's kind of like the hair follicle version of that particular previous hair when you were like, let's say 8 years old or something, or early development. you have this brand new hair follicle that hasn't been really targeted by DHT. So it's kind of like taking treatment before you notice hair loss, right? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. That if that's the effect of verteporfin, right? You get this hair follicle, kind of like you reset the older one that was there before, and now you can take treatment and prevent DHT from interacting with it. So you're pretty much just, I guess, getting an earlier version of your previous hair follicle, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I'd be very curious as well to see, how that might play out. It, not to completely, but in a related matter, that's of no significance. Just thinking about our conversation about early hair forums, back in the late 90s, 2000s, whatever it was. There was one guy that was on there. I think he went by Ernie. And Ernie, his whole thing was plucking all the hair out of his body.
Huh.
Like I don't know if he was trolling the site, but he would just tell everybody the best thing that you could do is DHT is good for you, and just pluck all the rest of the hair out of the body so the DHT can get to your scalp.
That sounds like that sounds like, we have this one guy on Tressless who pretty much talks about doing calf exercises or something like that, like calf raises and something just to increase testosterone. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I think it's some sort of troll, to be honest. Like when you get posts like that, you only hope it's a troll, right? Like I can't really take anyone serious, going around plucking hair off of themselves so they can increase DHT or whatever by some sort of weird mechanism.
Yep, there are some characters out there where they come up with this. The whole broccoli thing gets me when Kevin starts going.
Oh yeah.
I totally missed that. I've only caught like what's been said, but my God.
Oh wait, have you not seen his video on it?
Oh, I have.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just he explains the theory of everything. Like, okay,
broccoli. I like how he keeps that sort of, it's like some sort of artifact now in his videos, where it's like, is this real or is this just broccoli, right? So I think it's pretty funny how he always makes that reference.
Absolutely killer. I mean, his whole thing with Rob England also just cracks me up because he stopped referring to him by name.
Yeah.
It's like now it just calls him medical editor. It's clear that they had some direct communication, like, stop using my name. You can go ahead and bring it up, or there's going to be some legal problem. Like, it's just
they had their beef was pretty public, though. They had a pretty public beef. Yeah. Like, I do tend to agree with Kevin, though. I think he made his point pretty clear when it came to the Botox injections, and realistically, I think it was just what was it? Was it TGF beta 1? It was one of the was it TGF beta 1, I believe, was what Botox was downregulating in the Wnt pathway, which would cause the hair follicles to kind of reconstitute themselves and grow properly. And it wasn't necessarily just like the scalp tension. I think he dismantled the scalp tension theory pretty soundly.
Absolutely. I don't think I posted it on any of your videos, but I think I did on maybe one of his, and you can see the link that'll come up. Have you ever seen this guy promoting the teeter inversion table?
Is that the upside down thing?
That is.
I think I saw a video, not a video, an ad like this when I was younger on TV.
Yep.
That was a while ago.
It was, and I don't know how much this guy is still actively involved in his company, but the website is still active. They still sell the product, and for what I do for a living, people still ask me about it. And what comes to mind is if anybody would have turned themselves upside down and got more blood flow to their scalp than this guy, and he's bald. I go, that this disproves the blood flow theory, because Roger Teeter would have a complete full head of hair.
Oh, definitely.
So
Yeah,
there's your proof that that blood flow
no,
doesn't work.
I'm so surprised. I do remember seeing ads like this on TV before. I'm pre this was a TV ad, right? Like not this particular video, but this product.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow, this is
Absolutely. It's on like late night infomercials and stuff like
yeah.
that. Hype it up for low back pain. It's great for your overall health. It's this, that, and the other thing. It's, again, whether or not certain people might benefit from it, sure. But turning yourself upside down to grow hair, I don't see the evidence.
Yeah, sounds like a headache to be honest.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Well, I think that that pretty much does it. Is there any sort of, I guess, extended advice you could give to people in the audience or anyone who's dealing with hair loss at a young age?
Yeah, I think my number one is bit of advice is to follow the evidence and do a good self-assessment on your treatments and address it as early as possible as you can. There's really good preventative measures that are out there now. Get those things in place and then dabble in other things, but go after the root cause of things. Go for the most efficacious version of things that you can. You will thank yourself later on, and really assign yourself to the scientific method and rational thinking about things. And look for sound people on the forums, people that really post quality information and do deep dives into the information. And don't be afraid to challenge some of those narratives. Look for their thinking as to how they got there, because you've got options now that are fantastic for prevention, and it does look like there's some more positive things down the road. But the more that you can preserve at this point, which is certainly very, very, very possible, based on how I feel like my own story is, it is possible to preserve a decent cosmetic degree of coverage with things. And the sooner you start, the better off you are.
Definitely. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on today, and yeah, this was really cool. Just getting to talk to someone who's been on this stack for a while in being in this sort of environment. Definitely. Thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely, for sure. Look forward to chatting further as more things come up, and we can go from there.
Definitely. All right. See ya.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.